I really like Age of Sigmar Spearhead. I like it this much. 40k is great, I've played a lot of Kill Team, and I've dabbled in Age of Sigmar, but Spearhead is a really good game, and it's just a game mode for Age of Sigmar. But unlike Warhammer 40,000's Combat Patrol, Spearhead is actually a real game that's really fun. I've played all these Spearheads, and there is sort of a new addition or some updated rules for Spearhead. These, Sand and Bone. Those are empty. Spearhead is just so much fun. Unlike Kill Team, where you get 10 pretty cool guys, you get a whole army, just the right amount of army. You get to really experience the factions of Age of Sigmar. Usually you get 2 squads of goons, you get something fancy like a chariot or cavalry, and then you usually get some kind of a wild card unit and a hero who's sometimes very, very helpful, and sometimes they're just there. Every weekend we here at EonsOfBattle play Spearhead long into the night, and I've got 2 missions today. Number 1, to paint up some new Age of Sigmar terrain, but not this terrain, and to try to figure out what Spearhead am I gonna do next. Cracking open the new season of Spearhead, Sand and Bone, the terrain is pretty simple. Unlike 40k, where you put down as much terrain as possible so the player with the most guns doesn't just immediately win, Spearhead gives the players a lot of agency. Each player gets 1 long and 1 short so they can set them up how they want. Placement is important for movement, and some rules score points off of being near the terrain. There are 2 new elements in Sand and Bone, the Crypt of Blood, a terrain feature that stands in the middle of the board and improves a player's attacks, or the Icon of New Lamia, which can boost a unit's control score. Having a little extra terrain can be a big help for certain teams, especially like my Sylvaneth. We previously made some Spearhead terrain for Fire and Jade, replicating the size and shape of the terrain pieces. Last time we went hard into Order, Death, and Destruction. Now with Sand and Bone, we've done it again. For our August terrain pack, we're bringing back some more Death with the Graveyard Walls and a fancy little sarcophagus, and breaking into Chaos with Chaotic Wall sections, the perfect size and shape for Sand and Bone. And the Icon of New Lamia gave us the idea to make some icons of our own. Icons of change, war, decay, and excess. The ingredients for a good time. This terrain was designed by us and is available as digital STLs from EonsOfBattle.com. We printed this terrain out of Tech Resin, the best quality 3D printing resin, and we have a code if you guys want to try it for yourself. Use EonsOfBattle to get 8% off your order of Fast Navy Gray. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find merch like our EOB dice, wet pallets, waterslide decals, and basing toppers and bits. And it's also the best way to support us with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. And for the Chaotic Cemetery pack, we can offer it both digitally and physically printed for you. Now I know Sean's gonna be excited for some Khorne-specific terrain to play on, but also I wanna be excited for some Khorne-specific terrain to play on, because there's a Spearhead coming out, the Fangs of the Blood God, Oops All Doggo Edition. This is 2 squads of Fleshhounds, Karnak himself, and the Warcry team that was also Fleshhound themed. It looks great. It's all puppos, and I really want it, and I've been waiting for it forever. Since June, but it feels like forever, because it's August, and they just announced the pre-order, so it's gonna be end of August before I get to see what the dog do. I don't have any Chaos Spearheads, but I kinda want one. For this chaotic terrain, I wanna do a classic khorne. I dusted on some dark red, letting the primer show through in a few spots to keep the colors dark, and in a few spots I let the paint build up for full coverage. Then I switched to a bright red and dusted this on, focusing on the raised areas to pump up the color. After this airbrush layer, I put the same red onto my desk and sponged it on to give the wall some more texture and a quick dry brushing of a bright orangey red to bring out the details. Now to pick out some of the things, I took a gold and painted all of the trim and arrows sticking out of the top. The ramshackle piece is extra fun with big sections of pure gold and pure red. Now to tint the gold, I took a green-brown speed paint and started to layer this on. This transparent paint tints the gold, and each layer I put on makes the gold look darker and grimier, adding in some nice contrast. After a few layers, I had some parts of the gold almost black, and I came back in with my original gold, dry brushing this on to soften the transitions and hit the edges. I really like how intense the contrast was on the gold, so I decided to do this everywhere. I took a black gloss paint and thinned it down and blasted this through the airbrush in one big wet coat, and then quickly used a wet paper towel to wipe this away. The gloss black looks even darker than a matte black, and this only sticks around in the recesses, giving all the parts a really shadowy look. I mixed up some silver into my gold to brighten it up, and then I dry brushed this onto the gold to brighten it up and edge highlight. Then I felt like the red was a little dark, so I dry brushed on some more bright red onto the walls. On the Icon of War, I used some brown and tan dry brushing to bring out all the skulls for the Skull God, and I used these same colors to paint the paper prayers nailed to the dais. There's also a little Warhammer that I painted to look like stone with some gray paint. On the head of the statue, I painted on some red edge highlights to bring more attention to his face, and I dry brushed some more red to get it even brighter. Looking at the statue, the face was lacking something, so I decided to hit the horns with gold to give them the same treatment as the gold on the walls. Now he's looking much more impressive. Moving on to the Cauldron of Fire, I started off spraying on some bright neutral gray to cover over the black and dark red. Then I built up the fire in layers, spraying on some yellow all over, then orange starting halfway up, a little bit of red on top, and then just a little bit of black on the tips of the smoke. The cauldron itself I painted in gold, following the same steps as on the walls, finishing it off with some sponging of silver. The only thing left was picking out all the ground with a little bit of brown. I used a brush to get right up along the walls, and then some earth tan through the airbrush, making the ground away from the walls a little brighter. After that, I put a bright tan into my airbrush, turned the PSI way down, and I let the paint spit out to add some texture. I took a brown speed paint and glazed this over the ground, and once that was dry, I dry brushed some tan all over to pick out all the textures in the sculpt. With most of the painting done, I grabbed some grass tufts and stuck these on. Everything looks a little better with grass tufts. Now the terrain is looking dark and sinister, the only thing missing is blood. I took some Blood for the Blood God technical paint onto the tip of my brush and used my airbrush to blast it onto the piece. I'm only running air through my airbrush, making the paint explode into tiny little drops of blood all over. Now another spearhead that I've been sleeping on is the Hedonites of Slaanesh. I actually bought this box a long time ago and then put them together, played with them a few times, and then put them in a box for a while. But that's too bad because it's a really cool spearhead with a really cool rule. Temptations of Slaanesh. At the start of every turn, I get 6 temptation dice, and every time my opponent fails a shooting attack, melee attack, or saving throw, I can offer them a temptation. Hey, you want one of these? It's an automatic 6. And if they accept, then I get to roll on the depravity table. I get to make a d6 roll and add it to the total. And as my army goes up in depravity, they get better and better. And it's just a really fun bit of like player participation. And it's just really fun every time for my opponent to like, quickly try to move on. And then I'm like, no. How about a dice? Also, the models are just really cool. Between the Slickblade Seekers and the Slangor Fiendbloods, amazing names, there's some really, really cool models. But I was just bummed playing them because it turned out they were probably the worst spearhead in the game. Not by a huge margin. Spearhead is actually a pretty balanced game, and I need to get them back out on the gaming table because they recently got some big buffs. The Slangors got reinforced, so the first time that they're wiped out, they get to come back on the board, which is a huge bonus, and the number of depravity points I need to reach total depravity has gone down tremendously. So I definitely need to give these guys another couple of tries on the tabletop. I'm a little nervous to paint them because these guys are a lot, but I don't know, depending on how they play now with the new buffs, I might have to get them back out. I have a soft spot for Slaanesh. Pink and Monstrous is a fun combo. I asked Nick to print me 2 of these icons of excess, one for Spearhead and one to put as rubble for the base of my Slickblade Seekers. I started out blasting the statue with blue, then I put some gray into my airbrush and turned the PSI down so the paint was just spitting out, and I painted on some stripes of this to start my marbling. After the gray, I switched to a white paint, painting some stripes of this following the gray stripes I did before to make some bright veins running through the marble. And speaking of veins, I took a sharp paintbrush and some white paint and painted some wiggly lines running through, and I edge highlighted all around the bottom of the plinth. Now I want to protect my paint for the next step, so I hit it with a satin varnish. Then I made up a soupy mix of a dark saturated green and blobbed this all over, using a damp paper towel to quickly wipe this off the raised areas, leaving it only in the recesses. This color isn't very dark, I want the statue bright and saturated. Now for some of the details. I picked out the trim and the horns of the statue with gold, and I gave these spots a dry brushing of silver paint, and I washed them with a red-brown speed paint to push the saturation. Now for the decorations, like the little papers nailed to the statue. I layered these up with lines of brown and tan until they were almost white, and then for the candles, I wanted these pink. I started off with a dark magenta, and then built up brightness, finishing them off with little yellow wicks. My Hedonites will be pleased getting their objective control boosted by this statue. One of the spearheads to beat in our local meta is the Maggotkin of Nurgle. Nick plays these guys, and they can pack a punch. The big thing about them is they're very tough with a 5-up feel no pain or 5-up ward save on everybody, so they're tanking like 30% of all damage, which means they don't like to die. One thing I think is really cool about the Maggotkin is they handle Nurgle's Blessing a little bit differently than it's handled in 40k. In 40k, it's just an aura debuff. So as your Plague Marines march up the board, when they get closer to the enemy is just worse. It's automatic, it just happens. The way it works in Spearhead with the Maggotkin of Nurgle is it gives the player a little bit more agency, and it adds a little bit of excitement, because every time you're attacking, every time you roll a 6, you take that dice and you add it to your plague pool, and then that plague pool just sits there on the sideboard all game, and it kind of incentivizes you to play a little bit more aggressively, because the more attack dice you throw, the better your odds of getting those 6s. And then at the end of the turn, you take that plague pool and you start handing it out against enemies that you're in combat with. This gives you a great opportunity to do some extra damage and some very targeted damage. You take this plague pool, and then however many dice you have that many tries to roll 4-ups to cause mortal wounds. And even if a lot of those 6s came from like your Plague Knights just rock starring across the board, you can actually spend those with your, little piddly Plague Bearers who are in combat with something, and you can try to really force in some mortal damage. It's annoying every time Nick does it, but it's pretty good. Whatever my next Spearhead is, it's gonna have to be able to play into these Nurgle boys, at least decently. I wanna be able to beat Nick. To paint the icon of Decay, I started off spraying him with a bright green-white. Then, to protect the paint from the weathering I'll do later, I gave him a satin varnish. After that, I picked out his horns with gold, and I also gave him some gold grills, painting all his little teeth. Then I sprayed down everything with some earth brown, using a wet paper towel to get this off of the raised areas. Then I did the same thing with the dark green. When I started wiping, I wasn't getting enough of it off, so I quickly gave it a few squirts of water to reactivate the paint. This will be the basis of my grime, and to push this even further, I used some green contrast paint to make some spots darker. I used a pointy paintbrush to drag some streaks of this color down from the segments in the statue, and I highlighted the wrinkles and scales of his face. Then I took an orange speed paint and glazed this around his mouth, pulling it down in streaky lines from his lips, spilling it down onto the dais. Now between myself and my player group, we have almost every single Spearhead, but there's one Spearhead in particular that none of us have ever even looked at that hard, and that would be the Disciples of Tzeentch. In fact, when we're talking about Spearhead, we often forget it exists. Which is too bad, because Tzeentch is pretty darn cool, and the box isn't horrible. The Disciples of Tzeentch Spearhead has some interesting stuff in it. Number one, it has a big 10 squad of Zangors, which me, unlike Sean, likes Zangors. The rest of the box, though, is not as exciting. You get 10 humans that are cosplaying as Zangors, and then you get the weird guy on disc, and then you get Screamers and Flamers, which are pretty cool. But overall, I don't think my next Spearhead is gonna be Tzeentch. However, I do need a Tzeentch just to complete the collection. The God of Change is a really funky one, just a swirling vortex of eyes and teeth, and the last god I would ever want to ally with. I started off blasting the lower half with a blue and then spraying magenta on top. Then I took some white paint and sprayed this over the tentacles that make up his hair, spraying this over the top of his head and down his back as a highlight. And to reinforce this highlight, I took a brush and painted some white stripes, making them thick and close together for his forehead and thinning out as it goes down his back. Then I took a blue speed paint and airbrushed this over the whole head to get some blue into the recesses, and then I sprayed a yellow over top to make his head really saturated with intense colors. Then I started picking out things with gold, putting this over his teeth, his eyes, and the teeth that are in his mouth. To blend these into the statue, I glazed some bright blue over the bottom of his teeth and in his mouth. After that, I sponged some light blue over the bottom half of the statue to give this part some realistic texture, like it's a real statue on the bottom and then turning into an otherworldly monstrosity on top. Then I picked out all the details, painting the paper in a dark brown and highlighting them to an off-white. I painted this little decoration with gold, and I was thinking red for the candles, but decided to go with some nice gray so it was different from the pleasure statue. One of my goals for picking a new Spearhead is tournament play. I've really been enjoying Spearhead tournaments. I've been to 4 of them, and they're just a lot of fun. The game only takes about an hour, so you can get through a lot of games in a day, and I want a Spearhead team that can perform consistently well against the top factions. I have a bunch of Spearheads that I enjoy playing. Yndrasta and the Stormcast is always fun. It's flooding the board with a bunch of Skaven clan rats, and my Ogre Maw tribes hit like an absolute truck. Although post-nerf, they're not able to consistently win like they used to. I want a new Spearhead that has got some ward saves. I want to be dishing out some mortal wounds. I want some overlapping synergies. And so it sounds like what I need is a death faction. Games Workshop seems to really like death. The death spearheads seem like they're a cut above. Sean has both Soulblight Gravelord spearheads, Nick has the Flesh Eater Courts, and we have another friend who has the Night Haunt. With so many death factions, it makes sense to have plenty of death terrain. For these walls, I started off spraying the dirt with the brown, and then I splattered the base with some tan. I controlled the PSI, doing a first round of tiny little splatter, and then going back in with some bigger drops to lay down a texture. Then I hit all the tombstones with a dark blue, using the airbrush to get this color on faster. Now for the dry brushing. To make these tombstones more interesting, I want them blue, so I took my dark blue and added some white to brighten it up, and I started dry brushing and stippling it on. I worked up in layers, adding a little bit more white paint every time, dry brushing higher and higher up on the tombstones, and then for a final layer I switched to a bright saturated light blue. There's no actual gray on these, but because of the context, they do look gray. While I had the dry brush out, I quickly dusted the bottom of the fence walls with some gray and light gray paint, and then I started base coating all of the bricks with red. This took a bit, but I only had to do one coat. I don't mind if I don't get full coverage because it'll just become texture later on. I hit all the bricks with a coat of satin varnish and then took some tan pigment powders and mixed them with water. I took this on my brush and slobbered it all over the bricks. This will settle in the recesses, and once it's dry, I can wipe it off the surface of the bricks with a wet makeup sponge. I went all over wiping the bricks until the pigment powders were left only in the recesses as the grout. With the bricks all worked out, I hit the metal with the dark gold, and then I dry brushed some gold over the fence posts and sponged over the peaks of the fences. After that, I grabbed a brown speed paint and slobbered this over the ground. Then to get some more bright saturated colors on there, I took a teal blue and glazed this into the corners of the fence posts, using a wet brush to clean these up. I dry brushed some brown over the ground, and the death walls are done. The only thing left is the little sarcophagus. I painted this up just like the tombstones, giving it a dark blue base coat and some dry brushing up to a bright blue. After that, I picked out all the little decorations with a dark gold, giving them a dry brushing of a bright gold. This worm right next to the cold blue gives a lot of contrast, and to keep this going, I dripped some of the teal into the gold and then hit the candles with some red paint. Now we're ready to rock and roll with our own Spearhead terrain themed around our armies. We actually bought 2 copies of the new Sand and Bone so that we could have 2 games of Spearhead going simultaneously. And the new Sand and Bone is very similar to Fire and Jade, but everything is polished up just a little bit more. And another thing that's really nice is the cards are just made a little bit better. A lot of them are returning from Fire and Jade, but a few of them have been reworded and reworked so that they actually work well for every team, because some Spearheads previously weren't able to take full advantage of the cards like some other teams. So now it's pretty even how every Spearhead interacts with the deck. I think for me in my Spearhead career, the next Spearhead I'm gonna be going with is the Boner Boys Mortesian Elite, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, and I've committed the cardinal sin of proxying. I've actually been playing the Spearhead with my Centurion Warsuits because they're big boys on 50mm bases. I think going forward, I have to buy it and build it and paint it. I can't just use my Centurions in a tournament, but this will be my Spearhead for when I want to get the lead out and try to actually win. And I'll be doing a lot of that winning on practice games on our Spearhead terrain, available from EonsOfBattle.com. Let me know in the comments below if any of you guys have been trying out Spearhead, and if so, do you like it? And what teams do you run? And what are your strats and synergies? I've played almost every single one of them, and they're all pretty fun, and they're all pretty unique. Can't wait to really get deep in the bones. Thanks for watching.